My name is Ethan Calloway, and I never imagined that moving into a gated community would turn into the fight of my life. I bought a house in Briarwood Estates to be closer to my mother, Margaret, who needed full-time care. She had lived here for over 20 years, and despite her declining health, she refused to leave. To make sure she had the help she needed, I hired Rosa Martinez, a caregiver who had been like family to us for years. But the HOA didn't see her that way. According to them, Rosa was a violation, and they would do everything in their power to make her disappear. The letter arrived on a morning like any other, tucked neatly inside the mailbox, as if it were just another piece of routine correspondence. I stood on the porch, the warm scent of freshly cut grass filling the air, and unfolded the crisp sheet with deliberate patience, already suspecting trouble before my eyes even reached the words. The letter was printed in stiff, formal language, stamped with the unmistakable Briarwood Estates HOA seal, a symbol that once meant order and exclusivity, but now felt like a quiet threat lurking beneath its polished veneer. Dear Mr. Calloway, it has come to our attention that you have an unauthorized individual residing on your property. Per HOA Regulation Fort B, extended stays of non-resident personnel require board approval. Your failure to comply within 14 days will result in penalties, including fines and potential legal action. I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening as I skimmed over the words again, each sentence soaked in thinly veiled authority. I knew exactly what this was about. Rosa. The weight of the letter still pressed in my palm when my phone rang. Rosa's voice, usually steady and warm, was taut with unease. She hesitated, then spoke in a hushed tone, as if she feared someone might overhear. Ethan, they came to the house while I was with your mother. 2 of them. They just walked in. A cold, sharp tension spread through my chest as I listened. I could already picture them, Diane Whitmore, the self-appointed queen of Briarwood, and her ever-loyal enforcer, Rick Thornton. They had stood in my mother's living room, surveying the space like inspectors rather than guests, their presence an unspoken warning rather than a casual visit. My mother, too frail to protest, had simply sat there, caught in the middle of a battle she never asked for. Rosa had been forced to listen as they cited rules, policies, and consequences, their words laced with the kind of controlled condescension that only people drunk on power could wield so effectively. I didn't need to hear anything more. The letter in my hand, the tremor in Rosa's voice, the quiet fear lingering in my mother's house, it was all the proof I needed. If you've made it this far and are enjoying the drama of these HOA stories, you're not alone. Don't miss out on the rest of the story. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for even more shocking twists. This wasn't just about some bureaucratic technicality. It was about control. They wanted compliance. They wanted submission. But what they didn't realize was that I wasn't built to back down. If they wanted a fight, they were about to get one. The next morning I arrived at my mother's house earlier than usual, the crisp autumn air doing little to cool the slow-burning anger simmering beneath my skin. The living room smelled of chamomile tea and fresh linen, the soft hum of the television filling the quiet space where my mother sat curled beneath a knitted throw, her frail hands resting in her lap. She looked up at me, her expression calm but knowing, as if she had already sensed the storm brewing in my mind. Rosa was in the kitchen, her movements deliberate but stiff, the unease from yesterday still clinging to her like a shadow. I could see it in the way she hesitated, in the way her eyes flicked toward the front window, as if expecting them to return at any moment. She had spent years caring for my mother, yet now she had been reduced to an unwelcome intruder in the eyes of people who knew nothing about her. I lowered myself into the chair across from my mother, the letter still folded in my jacket pocket, its weight a silent reminder of what needed to be done. "Tell me exactly what happened," I said, my voice even but firm. Rosa dried her hands on a dish towel, drawing in a slow breath before she spoke. "They knocked once, then let themselves in," she said, her voice careful, controlled, as if replaying the memory with precision. Diane was the one talking. She said I wasn't allowed to be here without approval, and that there were complaints about a non-resident worker being in the neighborhood too often. Her lips pressed into a tight line before she continued. "I told her I worked for your mother, that I wasn't some stranger coming and going. She didn't care. She said I was in violation of the HOA's policies and that if I didn't leave, you'd start receiving fines. My mother let out a soft sigh, shaking her head. I told them I need Rosa here. I told them they had no right to make that decision for me. Her voice was soft but firm, laced with the quiet dignity of someone who had spent a lifetime standing her ground, even when her body betrayed her. I ran a hand through my hair, the slow burn in my chest turning into something colder, more focused. This wasn't just about Rosa. This was about control, about an HOA that had gone unchecked for too long, wielding their authority like a weapon. They had banked on me complying, on me doing what most residents did, nodding, accepting, letting them have their way. They had made a mistake. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my contacts. There were laws against this kind of overreach. I knew it. They knew it. But they didn't expect me to fight back. That was about to change. I spent the next few hours digging into Briarwood Estates' HOA bylaws, flipping through pages of bureaucratic language designed to overwhelm and confuse. The rules were dense, intentionally vague in places, yet meticulously worded in others. They had been crafted not just to maintain order, but to grant power to those who knew how to exploit them. But as I combed through the fine print, I found something buried under layers of legal jargon, a loophole. The very regulation they were using against Rosa, Regulation 14B, outlined restrictions on long-term, non-resident personnel staying on the property. But directly beneath that, Regulation 14C contained an exception. Caregivers providing essential medical assistance to a resident were exempt from the restrictions, provided they were hired through a licensed agency or held independent certification. I sat back, a slow grin pulling at the edges of my mouth. They knew this clause existed. They just assumed I wouldn't find it. But that wasn't all. The more I dug, the more I noticed something else, a pattern in the HOA's enforcement. Over the past year, they had issued multiple violations to homeowners under vague technicalities, all targeting certain types of residents. Many of these residents were either elderly, had full-time caregivers, or had reported issues with the HOA in the past. This wasn't about rules. This was about forcing people out. I clenched my jaw, realization settling in like a weight in my chest. This was bigger than Rosa. This was calculated. If they thought they could bully my mother and get away with it, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I grabbed my phone and made 2 calls, one to a real estate attorney I trusted, and another to a local investigative journalist. If Briarwood's HOA wanted a fight, I was ready to drag their entire operation into the light. By the next morning, I knew my calls had rattled the right cages. The shift in tone was immediate. A second letter from the HOA was shoved into my mailbox, this one colder, more aggressive, its legal threats sharpened to a fine point. A daily fine of $500 would now be imposed until Rosa was removed. If I failed to comply, further enforcement actions would be taken. They didn't specify what that meant, but I could read between the lines. This was retaliation. But they didn't stop at letters. A notice of violation was posted on my mother's front door, a bright red slip stuck to the glass like a scarlet mark of shame. When I pulled into her driveway that afternoon, I saw Diane Whitmore standing at the curb, arms crossed, lips curved into the kind of smug, satisfied expression that made my blood run hot. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Ethan," she said, her voice dripping with the condescension of someone who believed she had already won. "These rules exist for a reason. You don't get to pick and choose which ones apply to you." I stepped forward, unfolding the printed copy of Regulation 14C I had tucked into my jacket. "Actually, Diane, I do," I said, watching her expression shift ever so slightly. "You and I both know Rosa is fully exempt under HOA policy, but you didn't expect me to find that, did you?" Her jaw tightened. She didn't like being challenged, didn't like that I wasn't reacting like the dozens of homeowners she had bullied before. "You should be careful how you proceed," she said finally, her smile returning, but colder this time, thinner. "You have no idea what you're stepping into. It wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. And for the first time, I felt the weight of what I was up against. Briarwood's HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, they were protecting something, and I was about to find out exactly what. I wasn't the type to believe in coincidences, and after seeing the way Diane's expression had flickered at my pushback, I knew there was more to this than an arbitrary rule about non-resident workers. The HOA wasn't just wielding their authority for the sake of control. They were covering something up. That night, I stayed up combing through public records, HOA meeting minutes, and property violations filed over the last 5 years. Briarwood Estates was supposed to be a picture-perfect gated community, yet its turnover rate was unusually high, especially for elderly homeowners. Many had sold their homes under sudden financial strain, often after a string of HOA fines and legal threats had been thrown at them. Others had faced mysterious code violations that somehow never applied to the younger, wealthier homeowners moving in afterward. Then I found something that made my stomach turn: property acquisition records. Each time an elderly resident sold their home under pressure, the properties were quickly scooped up, and many of them had been purchased by a real estate investment firm called Whitmore and Thornton Holdings. The same Whitmore and Thornton as in Diane Whitmore and Rick Thornton. The pieces snapped together in my mind like a twisted puzzle. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, they were forcing people out, driving down home values, and quietly buying up properties at a fraction of their worth. It was a calculated cycle of legal intimidation, fines, and forced compliance. They weren't just trying to get rid of Rosa, they were trying to make my mother the next victim. My grip tightened around the stack of printed records in front of me. Diane thought I was just another homeowner she could intimidate into submission. She had no idea she had just picked a fight with the wrong person. By morning, I had a plan. The HOA thrived on fear, on the assumption that no one would fight back. But what if they weren't just fighting me? What if I made sure everyone knew exactly what they were up to? I started with Lauren Foster, a single mother who had lived in Briarwood for 6 years. She had always been polite but cautious, keeping her head down to avoid unwanted attention. When I knocked on her door, she answered with wary eyes, glancing toward the street as if expecting someone to be watching. "They came after you, didn't they?" I asked, holding up the documents I had printed. "The fines, the warnings, maybe even an issue with your permit when you had work done on your house?" Her hesitation was all the answer I needed. She exhaled slowly, stepping aside to let me in. Over the next few hours, I went door to door, speaking to homeowners who had been targeted by the HOA, elderly residents who had been harassed over minor infractions, families who had been threatened with legal action for things as trivial as their landscaping choices. A pattern emerged. Every single one of them had been marked for removal. By sunset, a small but determined group had formed. The HOA had ruled through intimidation for years. That was about to change. I wasn't just going to fight them, I was going to take them down. By the next morning, the retaliation had begun, creeping in like a sickness infecting the neighborhood overnight. Violation notices had been slapped onto front doors and mailboxes, their bright red ink bleeding warnings of non-compliance. My own home wasn't spared. A crisp notice taped to my garage door accused me of unapproved fencing, a claim so ridiculous I nearly laughed, until I realized I wasn't alone. House after house, the same thing. Petty infractions, sudden anonymous complaints, fabricated citations designed to remind everyone who really held the power. It was a clear message: step out of line and you will pay for it. The intimidation escalated fast. By midday, Lauren called me, her voice tight, controlled, but laced with something she was trying to suppress. "There was a car parked outside my house last night. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting there, watching." She hesitated before continuing. "I've never seen him before." Others reached out, whispering their own versions of the same story. Sudden noise complaints against homes that had been silent. Homeowners accused of unauthorized guests despite no actual visitors. Reports of late-night patrols, men in unmarked vehicles slowing as they passed, their presence an unspoken warning. The paranoia spread like wildfire, thickening the air with a silent unease. And then came the move that pushed me over the edge. Rosa called, her voice shaking, breath uneven. "Ethan, it's your mom. Someone from the HOA came by. Official looking, had a clipboard. He tried to get her to sign something." I gripped my phone tighter, a slow burn igniting in my chest. "What kind of something?" She didn't understand it, but he said it was for compliance. that it was in her best interest to sign now before the fines got worse. He kept pressuring her, Ethan. I was already grabbing my keys before she finished speaking. My mother was alone, vulnerable, and they had gone straight to her, hoping to manipulate her into signing away something before I could intervene. The drive over was a blur of sharp turns and adrenaline. When I pulled into her driveway, Diane Whitmore was already standing there, perched on the porch like she belonged there, her pristine white blazer crisp against the autumn wind, her manicured fingers drumming lightly against the folder she held. She turned as I stepped out of the car, offering a slow, knowing smile, the kind that sent a slow, crawling rage through my veins. "This has gone far enough, Ethan," she said, her voice smooth, measured, as if she were scolding an unruly child, rather than standing in front of a man who was seconds away from ripping that folder from her hands. She had no idea what she had just done. No idea that she had crossed the line from bureaucratic bullying into something far more dangerous. No idea that she had just made her biggest mistake yet. The weight of Diane's arrogance settled in the air between us, thick and unshakable. She held the folder loosely, a quiet confidence in the way her fingers traced its edge, as if she had already won, as if this was nothing more than a formality. But I could see it now, the cracks beneath the surface, the tension hiding in the rigid lines of her posture. She was confident, yes, but she was also desperate. She wouldn't have come here herself if she wasn't. I stepped forward, closing the space between us, slow and deliberate, my hands loose at my sides, my pulse steady despite the burn rising in my chest. "What's in the folder, Diane?" My voice was even, controlled, but the look in her eyes flickered for the briefest moment. Her expression remained composed, but she tightened her grip, just slightly. "A standard compliance agreement," she said smoothly, offering the folder like it was some kind of gift. "Given the recent concerns about unauthorized personnel on your property, we thought it best to resolve this quickly. Your mother's already under enough stress, wouldn't you agree?" The way she said it, soft and almost sympathetic, made my blood turn to ice. She was playing a game, a careful, calculated game, where pressure and manipulation blurred the line between suggestion and force. I reached for the folder, but instead of opening it, I simply turned it over in my hands, skimming the fine print along the back page. Legal jargon, clauses buried under meaningless language. And there it was, tiny, barely noticeable, but damning. An agreement waiving my mother's rights to dispute future HOA decisions. I looked back at Diane, and for the first time I saw something new in her eyes, uncertainty. She hadn't expected me to catch it, not so quickly. She had hoped I'd be too angry, too flustered, too distracted to actually read what she was trying to slip past us. But I had seen enough contracts in my career to recognize a trap when it was placed in front of me. A slow, knowing smile spread across my face. "Diane," I said, my voice calm, steady, "you really should have had a better lawyer draft this." She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, I turned the folder over and ripped it clean in half. The color drained from her face. And just like that, the game had changed. Diane's carefully constructed mask of control shattered the moment I tore the folder in half, the papers fluttering uselessly to the ground between us. For the first time, she wasn't the one dictating the terms. I watched the tightness in her jaw, the way her fingers curled at her sides, the sharp intake of breath as she recalculated her next move. She hadn't expected defiance. She had expected submission. And now, standing here with nothing left but empty threats, she was scrambling to regain the upper hand. "You're making a mistake, Ethan," she said finally, her voice measured but laced with a tension she couldn't quite conceal. "You think you can fight this, but all you're doing is making things worse for yourself, for your mother." I took a slow step forward, closing the distance between us, feeling the heat of my own anger simmer just beneath my skin, sharp and unwavering. "No, Diane, the mistake was thinking you could intimidate my mother into signing away her rights. The mistake was assuming I wouldn't dig deep enough to find out what you and Rick have been doing to the people in this community." She stiffened at that. The silence that followed was thick, stretching between us, charged with something unspoken but undeniable. She knew exactly what I was talking about, the forced violations, the pattern of targeted harassment, The strategic buyouts of elderly homeowners under financial strain. The real estate firm she and Rick had been using to profit off the very people they were supposed to protect. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough to make sure she heard every word. You've gotten away with this for a long time, haven't you? Pushing people out, squeezing them until they have no choice but to sell. And every single time, you and Rick are there, waiting, ready to scoop up their homes at a fraction of their worth. I tilted my head slightly, watching the flicker of panic dance behind her eyes. But see, there's one problem with your plan. You pushed the wrong family this time. Her lips parted, a slow inhale, a calculated response forming, but I didn't give her the chance. You have 24 hours to drop every violation against my mother, I said, my voice firm, final. Or I'll make sure everyone in this neighborhood, the local press, and a court of law sees exactly what you and Rick have been doing behind closed doors. For the first time, Diane looked afraid, and I knew I had just forced her into a corner she couldn't escape from. The shift in Diane's demeanor was immediate. The cracks were no longer just beneath the surface. They were spreading, widening, threatening to break everything apart. For the first time, she wasn't the one pulling the strings. She was the one caught in them, struggling, scrambling to keep the web of control she had built from collapsing beneath her feet. Her lips pressed together in a thin, bloodless line. You don't know what you're talking about, she said, but the words lacked the conviction they once held. The careful authority she had wielded so effortlessly before had started to fracture, replaced by something sharper, something desperate. I took my time, letting the silence hang between us, letting her sit with the weight of it. Then I pulled out my phone, turning the screen toward her. An email chain between her and Rick Thornton. Fines strategically applied, violations selectively enforced, plans to phase out non-compliant homeowners, a polished way of saying drive out anyone who won't bend to their will. Her expression faltered, just for a second, before she forced herself back into composure. Where did you get that? She demanded, her voice tight. You think you're the only one who knows how to dig? I asked, arching a brow. You've pissed off more people than you realize, Diane, and some of them were more than happy to help me bring you down. A flicker of rage crossed her face, but it was hollow now, an ember where a wildfire once burned. She had lost control. She knew it, I knew it, and she hated it, but she still had one last card to play. You want to fight, Ethan? She hissed, stepping closer, lowering her voice into something venomous. Fine, let's take it to court, but I promise you, Briarwood's HOA has deeper pockets than you do. This community stands with us, not with you. I smiled, slow, knowing. You sure about that? I turned, glancing toward the street. Across the neighborhood, homeowners were watching from their porches, their driveways, their windows. The people she had pushed, fined, harassed, the people she had tried to silence. And now, for the first time, they weren't silent anymore. Diane followed my gaze, and I saw it, the precise moment she realized she had already lost. Diane's breath hitched, her gaze flicking across the neighborhood as realization sank in. She wasn't just facing me anymore. She was facing an entire community. From their porches, their driveways, their windows, they stood watching, waiting. Homeowners who had once been too afraid to speak out, too isolated to fight back, were now united in silent defiance. She had ruled through fear for years, but now that fear had shifted. It was no longer theirs to bear. It was hers. I took a slow step forward, my voice steady, calm, the final nail in her coffin already in my hand. You won't be taking this to court, I said, letting the weight of my words settle between us. Because when we go public with this, it won't just be fines and citations on the line. It'll be fraud, predatory real estate practices, elder abuse, HOA corruption. I tilted my head slightly, watching her flinch at each word. Tell me, Diane, how do you think a judge is going to rule when they see evidence that you and Rick manipulated elderly homeowners into selling their properties under financial duress? When they see how you used your position to profit off of the very people you were supposed to protect? Her throat bobbed in a silent swallow. Her fingers twitched, gripping onto the last remnants of her composure. I gave her one last push. Or, I continued, lowering my voice just enough that only she could hear, you step down, you walk away, you let every single one of those bogus violations disappear, and in return, I let you do it quietly. Silence stretched between us, thick with the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. For the first time, Diane Whitmore had no move left to make. Her nostrils flared, her jaw clenched, and then, finally, with all the venom of a cornered animal, she spat out the words through gritted teeth. Fine. And just like that, it was over. The next HOA meeting was packed. Word had spread. Residents who had never attended before crammed into the community hall, some standing along the walls, others murmuring among themselves, their expressions a mix of anger and quiet anticipation. Diane sat at the head of the long oak table, her back straight, her hands clasped tightly together, her composure barely intact. She knew what was coming. I stood near the front, flipping through the copies of evidence I had prepared, emails, financial transactions, fraudulent violations, all printed in black and white for everyone to see. But I didn't need to speak first. The moment the meeting began, it was the homeowners who took control. Lauren Foster stood, her voice steady as she recounted the fines, the threats, the late-night surveillance. Gerald Sutton, one of the older residents, spoke next, detailing how the HOA had drained his savings with years of fabricated violations. And then came the flood. Person after person stepping forward, voices once silenced now refusing to be ignored. Diane sat frozen, her face blank, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table with each passing minute. She had ruled through fear for so long that she never prepared for the moment it would turn against her. Then finally I stepped up. The last blow. Diane Whitmore and Rick Thornton have been using this HOA to run a real estate scam, I said, holding up the documented proof. They find people into financial distress, force them out, and then use their connections to quietly scoop up the properties. And they've done it for years. I let the words sink in before turning to the rest of the board, which means the question isn't whether she's stepping down, it's whether this board is going to do something about it. The silence stretched, then one by one, hands went up. A vote. Diane was out. She didn't move at first, didn't speak, her face pale as the reality settled in. But when she finally stood, when she finally turned to face me, there was no more power in her eyes, no more control, just quiet, seething defeat. She grabbed her things and walked out, and Briarwood Estates would never be the same again. The days that followed felt different, lighter. The air in Briarwood Estates had shifted, no longer thick with the quiet tension of people living under the weight of invisible rules. The violation notices disappeared overnight, erased as if they had never existed. Homeowners who had spent years walking on eggshells now gathered in their driveways, talking freely, reclaiming a space they had once been made to fear. Diane was gone. Her reign was over. The HOA board, now scrambling to salvage their reputation, publicly denounced her actions and suspended every fine and citation she had imposed over the years. Rick Thornton tried to distance himself, but the damage was done. Residents had seen too much, learned too much. The people who once followed orders without question now demanded transparency. The power they had stolen was being returned, piece by piece, to the community. I sat on my mother's porch, watching the sun sink over the rooftops, casting long golden shadows across the manicured lawns. She sat beside me, wrapped in one of her favorite knitted shawls, a quiet smile on her face as she sipped her tea. "You did good," she said softly, her voice filled with something I hadn't heard in a long time, relief. I exhaled, letting the weight of the fight slip from my shoulders. "It's not just me," I said, looking out at the neighborhood, at the people who had once been silent and afraid, now standing together. They just needed someone to remind them they weren't alone. Rosa stepped outside, joining us, her eyes filled with gratitude, with a quiet, unshakable strength. The HOA had tried to take her away. Instead, they had brought us all together. And that was something no fine, no letter, no power-hungry official could ever erase. What would you do if the people meant to protect your community turned against it? Would you stay silent, or would you fight back? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you've ever faced HOA corruption, I want to hear your story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life battles against injustice.